Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to Slate's edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Tool of the Trade, written by Cold Fire Knight. Dean found himself rolled into a ball on the floor. His throat was dry, nearly closed shut. He tried to move, but the fog in his head kept him from making any motion. Where am I? It worked. It's so old I wasn't sure it would work, but it did. Ow, Dean said. Or at least he tried to say. But all that came out was a short grunt as he twitched from the pain of the voice shouting near him. How drunk did I get last night? I don't even remember drinking. Where am I, anyway? The breaking and uneven voice of a teen boy started yammering again, making his head hurt even worse. Would he please just shut up before I make him? Oh, he's moving. Quickly. There's something for him to drink. A different male voice, this one with a high nasal sound to it, asked, Get what? Teen boy answered, sounding flustered, I don't know, water, ale, something, I forget it. I'll go. Dean felt the pound of the running steps in his head, as much as he heard them from the teen boy left. Another young voice, pleasant and feminine, said this time, Such odd clothing. His jacket looks like leaves, and what is that on his head? It's a ball cap, Dean muttered, his eyes clenched shut while trying to roll over upright. Ah! She squeaked, jumping back as he managed to sit up. The move seemed to drain him as he slumped back against the wall behind him while wincing at her high-pitched squeal. The other male voice, nasal guy, spoke up. He can barely move. Now he is supposed to help us? Dean finally opened his eyes, momentarily happy that the room was dimly lit, until a brunette woman stood close in front of him and made his eyes strain from trying to focus on her. He thought she might be pretty, but couldn't tell in the light. The lack of focus didn't help either, so he closed his eyes in an effort to push back the ache that had begun near the base of his skull. I don't know, Daryl. He's just been summoned and is already moving. I'd say there's more to him than you seem to think. It sounded like Nasal Guy, or Daryl, according to maybe Pretty, pulled her upright and away from him. And I say anyone who isn't to be summoned in a time of great need should be ready to act immediately, Diana. Dean worked his tongue to build up a little saliva and forced it down his parched throat. He whispered, Hey! As he moved a hand in a small beckoning motion. Daryl gave a startled jerk as a sound before looking to where he was sitting. He repeated the motion, whispering, Yeah, drawing Daryl in closer. Dean cracked his eyes open to slits, gauged the distance between them, and flashed his hand to grab Daryl by the... What the hell? Was he wearing a robe? Letting that drop from his mind for the time being, he pulled Daryl close to meet his gaze, ignoring the nasally whine he was making. Daryl, right? He asked in a hoarse whisper. Daryl nodded, shaking his inch grip. Okay, Daryl, you're gonna shut the fuck up. Got it? The young man shook more but nodded again. Good, Dean said, before letting him go with a little shove. Dean sprawled back onto the floor and scrambled back away from him. Dean turned his attention to Diana, who had stepped back to the side during the exchange. He felt more drained than he wanted to admit, so he chose to go for a dramatic pause. Just as he thought he was going to have to strain out more speech, Teen Boy came back with his mug in his hands. Then thank the ancients to your back. Look, he's already moving and he shoved Daryl across the room. I know he'll be able to help us, Diana explained. He did not, Daryl growled. I fell as I tried to get away. As I tried to help him. Teen Boy, who Dean guessed had to be Len, looked at Daryl, then back to Dean, before shaking his head. Will you try harm me if I give you a drink? He asked. Dean tried to be clear his throat, but gave a, Give me a drink and I'll kiss you. Len actually blushed and glanced towards Diana. There is no need for that. I only want to help you. He passed the mug to Dean, who put the mug to his lips and paused as the cool liquid touched him. After a couple minutes of slow, small sips to wet his throat, he took a deep breath and drained the mug in one long pull. He squeezed his eyes tight, trying to work up some moisture behind them to get rid of the gritty feeling on his eyeballs. Once he opened them fully, he noticed the three young people around him, each of them seeming to be shaken. Daryl, who actually was wearing a robe like that kid who was the wizard from the movies, looked to be thin and had a pinched look to add to his bucked teeth. Dean saw that Diana was wearing a gown and actually was pretty, though he wasn't sure she knew it yet. Len, wearing what Dean could only describe as Robin Hood clothes, had that appearance that all teen boys did once they hit their growth spurts, all gangly limbs and awkwardness. His frequent looks towards Diana told Dean everything he wanted to know about them, and he made the decision that humor was the best approach before focusing his attention on Len. "Thanks, the offer still stands." Len grew even redder. Guess he's never kissed anyone then, not even a girl. Shame. Her looks back say she's waiting for him to do it. Maybe they'll even figure it out at some point. Dean felt his limbs grow more responsive, so he reached out a hand to Len. "Never mind, but thanks for the drink. Mind giving me a hand up?" Len and Diana both nodded, each grasping a hand and pulling as she stood up. "Thanks. Name's Dean. Now where the hell am I?" Len swung his arms out and wide. "Welcome to Belengna. We've summoned you to aid in us in a task."
"You're, kidding, right?"
"Indeed, I'm telling the truth. We have a great need, and you were summoned here by a device that our ancestors made." Dean watched Len pull out an odd-looking something from his pocket. "At the beginning of the time of peace. Will you aid us?" Dean looked over the group, then looked worried but expectant, as though he could solve their problem. Hell, maybe he could.
"I can try. What's the job, and what's the pay?"
Len looked surprised. "You would require payment?"
"Hell yes, it's not like I volunteered to be here."
Len sighed and pulled a purple bag from his tunic to shake it, creating small metallic noise. "This is the pay as far as the job." He turned away and wanted Dean to follow him. The other two trailed behind, and all Len led them down the flight of stairs, then another. Once they approached the third set of stairs, Dean stopped.
"Hey, how far down do we have to go?"
"These are the last stairs," Diana assured him.
"As long as you say so."
When they started walking again, Dean took a moment to steadily smooth his hands along his pants. Relief filled him when he felt his knife in his front pocket. Always best to have a weapon and not need it, though saying boo might make these kids pass out. The lump in his rear pocket told him that his wallet was still there too. Not that anything in it was likely to be useful right now, he thought and chuckled. He patted the upper pockets of his jacket, which he remembered emptying that morning, then slid his hands into the larger bottom pockets. The shape of his right pocket made him physically relax. He pulled it out, pressed in a pair of buttons, and slid his hand apart. With a mechanic click, Len turned around and looked at him. "What?" Still clearly nervous, Len nevertheless faced him. "What was that noise?" John gave him a hump.
"It's my Gerber. See?"
He held out at him for him to examine. "They're just tongs."
"What? No, they're not. Look, do tongs do this?"
Dean pressed the buttons on the back and slid the jaws in a way out of the handles. Darrell stared at the tool. "Amazing."
"I know, and that's just one of the things it can do,"
Dean replied, placing the tool in his pocket and moving to follow Len down the final flight of stairs. Darrell fell into step behind them, matching a stride as to Dean's. As they reached the bottom stair, he eased closer to Dean and slipped his hand into the pocket with the tool. At that point, his searing pain flared through his hand. He screeched and tried to pull away, but the pain on one finger forced him to move his hand back to where it had been.
"You're an idiot. You know that, right?"
Dean asked Darrell without turning around. Darrell felt his injured finger and hand being pulled out of and away from the pocket. The young man looked down to see what was biting his finger. To his shock, it was a small pair of tongs that belonged to Dean. Unfortunately for him, Dean was holding them and stopped to look over his shoulder at the gaunt lad.
"Be glad that wasn't my knife, or you'd be short of a finger. Try to pick my pocket again and see what happens. Got me?"
Darrell nodded in agreement, not wanting to anger the man any further.
"Good." And the pain increased briefly once the pressure clamped onto his finger let go.
He directed his next comment towards Len.
"How much further? I want to get home, if that's even possible."
"I'm sure it is," Len said, though his tone sounded more hopeful than confident to Dean. "Our gold is in this room." They entered a dusty room filled with empty shelves and a few books and tables, along with a box on a pedestal. Len walked over to the box. "Here it is."
"It's a box."
Dean leaned in and took a moment to examine it.
"With a keyhole."
He stood up to face Len.
"Where's the key?"
"We don't know," Diana admitted.
"What's in the box, then?"
"We also don't know," Darrell answered.
"Then what the hell do you know? Because I know I was dragged here against my will, and I know I'm getting angry," Dean seethed.
He decided to throw something extra.
knowing that they would have no idea where it came from.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Oh, he would have given a pretty penny to have a camera to capture their faces at that moment. They looked terrified, which was at least what they deserved. And he decided to have some more fun with it. He snatched up the box and dropped it onto the ground. "Be careful with it," then cried out. Dean stomped on the box with his work boots instead, only to have it skitter from under his foot. He picked it back up and looked it over.
Ha! No marks. Tougher than it looks. Guess it's time for something different.
He pulled his pocket knife and flicked it open with a single finger, the blade locking in place with a click. The trio watched while he tried to use the blade to pry the lid open. While it was narrow enough to fit the gap, the tip wouldn't give him any grip to force it open, and the sharpened edge wasn't firm enough to let him leverage it open. After realizing that the blade's tip was too large to fit into what appeared to be the box's keyhole, he closed it, put it back in his pocket, and reached into his jacket pocket. Dean flicked his wrist, making Daryl flinch and a sharp snicks down. He watched him open a small set of tongs he had used earlier, only to see him use his fingertips and thumbs to pull even smaller tools out from within the tongs handles. While he watched as Dean worked through each tool, he noted that the tools were actually attached inside the tongs handles. The summoned one was apparently in search of a particular tool that would allow him to open the box. After a couple of moments, Dean slipped in a thin tool into the small opening and twisted. It gave a small click, and the gap appeared in the box's seal. "Is there anything your tool can't do?" Len asked as he stared in amazement.
"Well, I'm still here, so there's that," Dean answered in a flat tone. "Let's see what's in there that's so important that you pulled me to wherever the hell I am."
"I told you that this is Valenga, and you were summoned by the device our ancestors created," Len said.
"Yeah, I don't really care. Let's see what's in here." "The fuck?" He glared at them. "Are you kidding me?" he yelled.
Diana began speaking. "Sir, please don't be angry." Len stepped in front of her, holding out the clinking bag to Dean. Your device was still in the other hand. "We honestly didn't know what was in it. Please take your payment and go." Dean snatched the bag and shoved it into his pocket.
"Go where? You idiots dragged me here to open a fucking box of what looks like weed."
Len stammered. "We had need." Dean finished his shot.
"Where am I supposed to go?"
Daryl had a terrified look on his face and yelled, "Home!" and lurched for Len's device. Dean wouldn't have guessed that he was that quick, but the movement startled Len, who yelled, "No!" Daryl pressed his thumbs into the top of it, yelling, "Back homus!" and Dean's world went dark. He heard a familiar voice from what sounded like a distance. "Dean, are you okay?" A hand gripped his shoulder and gave him a gentle shake. He slowly opened his eyes and found himself on the ground, looking at a brown boot, shifting his gaze upward. Dean saw the hand it belonged to. Walt.
"Ah, shit. What happened to you?"
"I thought that you were taking a leak and coming back, but it's been over an hour."
I'm not sure,"
Dean answered, shifting to a sitting position before Walt helped him stand.
"Weird damn dream. Then you woke me up."
"Well, you had me worried. I was about to call the cops," Walt said.
"Sorry. Don't know what happened,"
Dean replied, shrugging his shoulders. He froze, noticing a weight in his left pocket that wasn't there before.
"What's this?"
He cautiously slid his hand into his pocket, searching until he felt the soft fabric. With a look at Walt, he pulled up the purple bag, slipping his fingers into the small opening. He spread it and looked inside to see what appeared to be several yellow metal coins.
"Oh man, that shit was real?"
End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.